Since 2019, few videos have been as requested as this one. About 3 years ago, I started my Pokemon Generation review series, and it ended up being way more popular than it had any right to be. And now that I can say with near certainty that we won't be getting a Pokemon Glistening Platinum before Gen 9 comes out, I figured it was finally time to deliver the goods. So in this video, I'll be going over the 3 core Generation 8 games, Pokemon Sword and Shield, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and Pokemon Legends Arceus, to finally answer the question, how good or how bad was Gen 8? In my opinion. Beginning with Sword and Shield, I've actually had this portion of the review loosely scripted for about the last 2 years, constantly going back and changing small things. Sword and Shield are, of course, remarkably tough games to tackle in the online landscape, given how extremely divisive these titles are, and it feels like any type of nuance you try to bring to the conversation will just end up getting you hated. But then I realized the internet would just do that anyway, so that made me feel a little bit better. So I want to start my review of Pokemon Sword and Shield with one very important thing that I think it gets right. It's fun and to the point. Oh wait, that was 2 things. Now some people might say, wait, stop the presses, if the game is fun, then that's all that really matters, right? I mean, okay, yeah, you're partially correct, but I wish it were that simple. Sword and Shield are pretty much the first Pokemon games in over a decade that just send you out into the world without too much meaningless text or over-explaining every little detail. Something that the Gen 6 and Gen 7 games were notorious for. I think overall, Sword and Shield are very respectful of the player's time, which makes them more fun to revisit than a lot of other modern Pokemon games in my opinion. The process of raising Pokemon both in the main story and competitively is extremely streamlined and convenient. Visible wild Pokemon encounters make hunting for your favorites for hours on end a thing of the past, and the overall pacing of the game is quite good by Pokemon standards. Although, that's mostly due to the fact that there isn't really much of a story present here, but that's something we'll touch on later. Making it so that you can get to the wild area within the first hour of the game before you've even been introduced to gyms is certainly the game's biggest strength, if you ask me. This game is not shy about showing off its Pokemon variety extremely early, and this selection of Pokemon even rotates on a daily basis as the weather changes. Having a great dex is an important box to check off in any Pokemon game, but so is making sure those Pokemon are well distributed. I think Galar does indeed do a great job of pacing how many new Pokemon you see throughout the game. I know this gen only introduces about as many Pokemon as Gen 6 and 7, but through good distribution, they've managed to make that number feel slightly larger. I also love how they brought back cross-gen evolutions through regional forms, something we haven't seen since Gen 4. Outside of Sylveon at least, but that barely counts. To me, this felt like the most natural progression for regional variants to take, and it's awesome to see Pokemon like Farfetch'd and Corsola get some well-deserved evolutions. The only major downside to how good team building is in this game is how little it's accounted for on the NPC side. After the Alola region games made an effort to have us fight against fully EV-trained Pokemon and other major bosses, Sword and Shield takes a very disappointing step backward when it comes to difficulty. I know, most Pokemon games are easy, but if you're going to make it easier than ever before to raise a solid team of Pokemon, at least make the gym leaders somewhat competent. Just slapping Dynamax onto their ace Pokemon doesn't really cut it. Speaking of the new regional mechanic Dynamax, this mechanic is a bit hit and miss in some areas. I already covered this in my gimmick review video, so I'll try to be brief. In terms of presentation, I love it. I think it makes the gym battles feel more grandiose than ever before, and as I've said before, I think the G-Max forms are very creatively inspired. It also allows us to have max raid battles and later Dynamax adventures, which, while not perfect, are still some of the best multiplayer features that we've had in a very long time. I know that Pokemon Get Big isn't really the most exciting concept in the world, especially compared to Mega Evolution or Z-moves, but it certainly succeeds in its presentation. Plus, at this point, we all but know that Dynamax will just be a temporary mechanic doomed to be replaced by the next generation's gimmick, so I'm totally fine with this one being far less intrusive and just serving to add a little more oomph to those big moments. I mean, if I'm gonna be bored with how easy the gym battles are, at least I'll be somewhat entertained by the spectacle of giant battling Pokemon. Where Dynamax misses the mark, though, is simply in how it works in battle. Even with the 3-turn limit, it's just so much more overpowering than Megas or Z-moves, to the point where it's pretty much unusable in competitive single battles. It is blatantly clear this mechanic was designed with VGC in mind, and on that note, why would you even want to play singles in this game when the 20-minute battle timer exists? If you're doing full 6-on-6 battles, 20 minutes is surely cutting off the majority of them. Did I mention that Ferrothorn and Toxapex survived the Dex cut, and that Blissey came back as DLC? Ain't nobody finishing these battles before dinner. This single issue prompted a huge movement in the competitive Pokemon community where dozens of prominent Poketubers literally begged Game Freak to patch in a longer timer option, because the current timer has all but killed the competitive Pokemon landscape on cartridge. And despite this, no effort was ever made to patch the online timer. In fact, this problem just ended up carrying over into the Sinnoh remakes, which is just downright insulting at this point. I just don't understand. Gen 8 has made competitive Pokemon as accessible as it's ever been, yet this one lack of an option makes it so much more restricted. It feels like they were saying if you're not playing VGC, then you shouldn't play at all. Enjoy your singular year of VGC Worlds, by the way, Sword and Shield, you've earned it. But let's focus back in on the single-player campaign. The single biggest problem I have with Sword and Shield is the Galar region itself. This is by far the most boring region to traverse in all of Pokemon. Routes are easier to get through than a McDonald's drive-thru. Long dungeons are non-existent, and the wild area, although rich in Pokemon variety, offers next to nothing in terms of exploration. You're not even allowed to surf using your bike until you're nearly at the 7th gym. That's ridiculous! The only saving grace to this region's geography is the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra. And, well, mostly just the Crown Tundra. Isle of Armor, I'm pretty much indifferent on. But overall, these areas are far better designed than anything in the base game. They're littered with secrets to uncover and long, winding roads to explore. I will say, in terms of aesthetics though, I think James Turner and crew absolutely nail it. I'll give credit, the cities and most of the routes, although underwhelming in terms of explorability and scale, strike a perfect balance between representing the real-world United Kingdom and the fantasy elements of a traditional Pokemon world. If there is one thing I will not criticize Sword and Shield for, it's the art direction. And yes, let's make a distinction between art direction and graphics, because a lot of people tend to get those two things conflated. Yes, when Sword and Shield looks bad, it looks bad! But in certain areas like Motostoke and Balanleia, Pokemon has never looked better. I do wish there were more graphical consistency, but all in all, I don't think it's a terrible looking game. Especially with the character designs, these are the best the human characters have ever looked. And that's including games that come after this, like Legends Arceus and even Scarlet and Violet. I do agree with the people who say that the largest media franchise in the world should have far better looking games than this, but truth be told, we don't know how much of that profit actually goes back to the Game Freak studio, so I want to be fair on that point, since nobody really knows all the facts. If they claim they do, they're lying to you. All I really want to say is that the art style does a lot of heavy lifting here, and I don't think it gets enough credit. Outside of just the character designs, I think the characters in this game are quite good as well. Sure, there are stinkers like Chairman Rose, but I do enjoy the company of characters like Leon, Hop, Sonia, Bead, and Marnie. They each have a healthy dose of personality, but they don't overstep their boundaries enough to become annoying like the group of Kalos friends. My only gripe is that I've never seen a Pokemon game with characters so well defined, but with absolutely nothing to do with them. They make a huge deal out of Leon being the strongest champion ever, but the story barely gives you any chances to see him in action. Except losing against Eternatus. Bead is a great cocky rival reminiscent of the old school ones, but he gets taken out of the story just after the halfway point. Marnie's a nice personality, but I feel like I have 2 meaningful conversations with her in the whole game. There is a theme of growth and passing the torch to the next generation present here, as Sonia succeeds her grandmother as professor, Marnie and Bead both take over as gym leaders, and Leon ends up hitting the battle tower to make Galarian trainers stronger. But aside from Hop, who actually has a decently defined arc in the middle of the story, I feel like all of these just happen because they need to. There's a skeleton of a well-defined story present here, it just barely bothers to fill in the gaps. And of course, when it comes to Eternatus and Chairman Rose's schemes, it really doesn't touch on those at all. To the point where I almost wish that had just been used as the post-game story instead. Because it really doesn't do anything but bring the end of the game to a screeching halt. Truth be told, I actually kinda like this character-based approach to storytelling more than the usual evil team tries to catch legendary plot. It actually leads to a better paced game in my opinion, but you can't just leave it half-baked. And that's kinda the impression I get from Sword and Shield in general. Great concepts, but very poor execution. There are things that I really like here, such as team building and raid battles, and I can't lie, whenever I make it to that final battle against Leon and he throws off his cape, I get the biggest, dumbest grin on my face. There are shining moments of brilliant presentation here. But for every big moment like those, there's tons of little gaffes and areas that just get glossed over that gives the general impression of an unfinished game. I haven't even talked about the Dex Cut, which these games are most infamous for, but I feel like I really don't need to, because it's just indicative of the game as a whole, unfinished and unpolished. Imagine if a little more time was put into the wild area, if a little more time was devoted to map design, if a little more time were put towards the story, if the game came with the Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra finished and ready for the post-game. Almost every problem this game faces stems from too little time in the oven. And this is a problem that the 3DS games also faced, but here on the Nintendo Switch, those little ignorable problems have been blown up in glorious 1080p for the world to see. It's an ambitious game that failed to meet expectations. But what happens when an unambitious game also fails to meet expectations? Well, there's no need to speculate because we got just that with the highly anticipated Sinnoh remakes Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I feel like I can't really say anything about these games that I didn't already say in my Gen 4 review because there's barely anything new and of note to speak of. As far as I'm concerned, this game is a $60 music CD with a free mobile game attached. That at least makes me feel a little bit better about my decision to buy it. The truth of the matter is that nobody actually wanted a Diamond and Pearl remake, because everybody and their grandmother knows that Platinum is the actual game that people like. Because OG Diamond and Pearl are a steaming dumpster fire. So what we actually wanted was a Platinum remake branded as Diamond and Pearl, kinda like how Heart Gold and Soul Silver was more similar to Crystal, but still revolved around Ho-Oh and Lugia. These games just have the biggest identity crisis of all time. They can't decide when they want to be blindly faithful to the original and exclude things from Platinum that would have strictly made the experience better, or when they want to go completely off the rails and try something new. Oh, you want a Gliscor on your team? Okay, then go underground and catch a Gligar, that part is fine, but we won't give you a Razorfang to evolve it until the post-game because that's the way it was in Diamond and Pearl. Pick a side! If you have it half one way and half the other way, you end up pleasing nobody. For all the grief I constantly give Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, at least those games felt like they knew what they wanted to be. They weren't trying to accurately recreate Gen 3, and that's okay because they stuck to their plan. This game has no plan. It flip-flops randomly between changing things and being faithful to the worst parts of Diamond and Pearl, like the terrible decks, the terribly paced story, etc. Even in terms of difficulty, this game can't decide whether it wants to be the most brutal game in the series, giving trainers cracked out movesets fully EV trained and holding competitive items, or make it a cakewalk by integrating affection and force EXP share into the game. This game has no earthly idea what it wants to be. The amount of pointless workarounds this game does to make you get the experience you want, or in some cases just to get the content that should have been in the game to begin with, is so frustratingly stupid. If Sword and Shield is the half-baked lasagna that made everyone at the party sick, then this game is the turd that gets pooped out 12 hours later. I get no fulfillment or satisfaction from playing this game unless I'm literally underground mining and ignoring everything about the game that actually has to do with Pokemon. Every single Pokemon game ever made, my friends always ask me one simple question: is it worth buying? And every time, I say yes, because if you like Pokemon, then chances are at least one thing the game has to offer will scratch your itch, and you might end up liking some of the newer features. This is the only time when my friends presented me with this question that I adamantly said, no, do not spend your money on this game. But it's Pokemon, so of course they did anyway. And surprise, surprise, most of them ended up not even finishing it. If I want a better art style, I'll go play Platinum. If I want a better Pokedex, I'll go play Platinum. If I want a better story, I'll go play Platinum. If I want to play the fastest version of Sinnoh, then I'll go play Platinum on an emulator with a speed-up button. You'll never catch me playing that game on DS. Again, the only thing I can confidently praise about this game is the music. I love how they made it sound orchestral, yet as close to the original composition as possible. I feel like a lot of the remakes end up losing the atmosphere of the original compositions, and that's not the case here. Music, A+. I feel like there's not much else to say here because I already gave Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl their own dedicated review video last December, and I feel like my thoughts are the same now as they were then, if not a bit more negative. And if you disagree with me and you think that these games are exactly as they should be, then just wait about 10 years when Nintendo Switch Online inevitably gets shut down, and then when you want to go back and replay this game, it will be on version 1.00 with the crappy music and the rampant glitches and no multiplayer and no post-game. I think you'll come around to agree with me, because that's just what happens when you ship an unfinished game. Okay, we made it through that. Woo! Finally! Let's talk about Legends Arceus. Like the other Gen 8 games, it is not the most polished, but I'll be darned if it's not one of the most fun Pokemon games ever made. I mean, I know, I said Sword and Shield was fun, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to what Legends gave us. I will admit the first leg of the game is a bit of a tutorial-ridden slog, and for the first 3 hours or so, all I could think was, why does it look so bad, why does it look so bad, why does it look so bad? But you know what? When it finally cuts loose and lets you explore to your heart's content, the rest of the game is a delight. There is a sense of childlike wonder just walking around finding extremely powerful Pokemon to take on, and being extremely hype when you actually defeat or catch one. If you're good enough at maneuvering Weirdier, there's numerous opportunities to break progression and get to areas that you normally wouldn't have access to. It may not have the widest selection of Pokemon ever, but the game does an excellent job incentivizing you to catch the Pokemon that are available, tying them to numerous side quests and Pokedex completion. It's certainly a game that puts the Pokedex first, but they somehow make filling out the Pokedex actually feel fun. Not to mention, they make the most of the smaller decks by stuffing every bit of personality and detail into the Pokemon. Did you know that Nosepass always faces north in this game? Did you know that Blissey will come check on you if you fall from a high place? Did you know that Arceus can literally walk on water? As a Pokemon superfan who reads more dex entries than any human ever should, little stuff like this just makes me appreciate the game so much more. I imagine this is what Game Freak was alluding to when they talked about making the most of the dex cuts back in Sword and Shield, except Sword and Shield didn't actually make that happen, it was more of an excuse for the future. There are things this game changed that I never even considered needed changing, like the way that Pokemon learn moves, stuffing them into a submenu that you can rotate them in and out of. That's genius! Why did it take 25 years to get to this point? Restructuring the way Pokemon stats are calculated to put less emphasis on grinding, changing up the battle system in a way that discourages you from sweeping through the game with one overpowered Pokemon, because eventually your opponent will get to act even if they're slower. Admittedly, that last change only works in a game that's completely single player, and that would be completely disastrous for competitive play, but hey, we're not worried about that here, are we? They even made the Link Cable a physical item and give it away alongside other evolution items as rewards for helping other players. How cool is that? The music is possibly the best it's ever been here. It's not present all the time, but when it does creep in, it fills you with all the memories of modern-day Sinnoh. The music ranges from light and atmospheric while exploring to intense with clear inspiration from ancient Japan when in battle. And the power of the music only gets displayed more as the game progresses. The game took more of a dark turn than I was expecting towards the end, being exiled from the village and being forced to fend for yourself against the expedition team that took you in. Of course, I've already talked ad nauseum about the grandiosity of the battles against Volo and Giratina and how it very well could be the best fight ever in Pokemon. Is the story of this game great? No. Are the graphics of this game great? Also no. Okay, but is the multiplayer great? No, it barely exists actually. But this game is a prime example of just how far good core gameplay can carry you. It may be remarkably rough around the edges and lack a lot of the features or depth that most modern Pokemon games have, but it's just something that most of us are willing to forgive because, as my boy Reggie says,
if it's not fun, why bother?
Every major thing this game needed to get right, it got right. Ever since the 3D era of Pokemon began back in 2013, I know that myself and many others have felt some of the magic slowly drain away, as it's abundantly clear that Game Freak is possibly the most thinly stretched they've ever been. But in spite of many of Legends Arceus' surface-level flaws, this game has single-handedly managed to raise my hopes for the future. If this is the template that the next era of Pokemon is going to be built upon, then I welcome that future with open arms. Overall, Generation 8 is one of the most mixed bags we've ever received, not only in terms of quality, but also in terms of these games' identities and styles. We have Sword and Shield, a very natural progression of the same style from the Alola games, a brand new game in a brand new world that was both fun and flawed. We have Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, very safe and retro chibi-styled remakes that sought to return fans to a simpler time. And Legends Arceus, which uprooted everything we knew about Pokemon and laid the foundation for future open-world games. With all that being said, this is certainly one of the hardest Pokemon generations to put a letter grade on. But if Sword and Shield is a C, and BDSP is an F, and Legends Arceus is an A, then the whole generation falls right in the middle with a C in my opinion. Not good, not bad, just average. So there, that wasn't so bad, right? I only really say that because some people get upset and say that my videos are too opinionated, which kind of the point. But hey, thank you so much for reaching the end of this video. It means a lot. Shout out to my newest channel member from last week, Mitch K. Thank you very much, Mitch, for joining. As always, be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe for more videos just like this one. See you guys next time.